Now, Dorothy's going to be speaking about the situation in Germany, and we'll be able to talk about all the different changes in terms of gender identity, ideology, women's rights.
Today, as I wanted to talk about the new self-ID law that has been on the cards for a while, you may have heard. The draft proposal of this new self-ID law was published just recently, and that's what I want to talk about today. It, according to the German government, is a replacement and improvement to the current legislation, which is the Transsexuellengesetz, the Transsexual Act. So first, I'll just give a brief summary of the Transsexual Act to see where the starting point is and where Germany is wanting to move to. The Transsexual Act has been around since the early 80s and allows people to be legally recognised as the sex other than they were born with. It also allows people to change their first name, which is actually a very big thing in Germany. You can't just change your first name because you want to. There's no deed poll here. So that it also makes it very easy. It also offers an easier option for people to change their first name if they wish to have the first name of the other sex as a first move to living as the other sex. But yes, you can also have your registered sex changed by law, subject to certain conditions. At the moment, you have to have lived in the chosen sex for 3 years at least, and present 2 expert medical reports confirming that it will be beneficial for you to change your legal sex. You also have to state that you plan to live as the other sex with high probability long-term, i.e. the rest of your life. One thing that maybe some people don't know is that Germany is also one of the few places in Europe where it is possible to have a third sex entered into your passport ID. You can register to become the diverse category where you would, for example, get an X in your passport. So looking at that way, the situation is already relatively flexible in Germany. And the situation for changing your registered sex did used to be a lot stricter before the 80s. You could still get the entry changed, but you had to have undergone sex reassignment surgery. And interestingly, you had to prove that you were permanently infertile. So coming from there, the situation has been made a lot easier in Germany already, but that's not enough for some people. Yeah, interestingly, something that we at WDI Germany only became aware of recently is that there is a line in the German constitution, which has been in there since 2011, stating that sex is not just physical and that a sexual identity can also exist. So it's pretty obvious that they've been setting the scene for self-ID law for longer than we thought. Yeah, and the current German government, which is known here as the traffic light coalition because it's made up of 3 different parties, the Social Democrats, the Liberals and the Greens, want to replace the Transsexual Act with the new Self-Determination Act, as it's literally translated as on self-ID, with the aim of removing financial and bureaucratic hurdles. They state that it serves to only make life easier for trans community and that it does not harm anyone else, something which we all know not to be true. So the new law, what does it involve? The new law would allow anyone, and I really mean anyone above the age of 14, to legally change their name and registered sex simply by submitting a declaration at their local registry office. If that wasn't astonishing enough, something even more astonishing is that the proposed law would allow people to make this change once a year if they wanted to, which is quite a change from the Transsexual Act, where you have to prove that there's where you have to state that there's a very high probability that you would live in your chosen sex for the rest of your life. Yeah. Another significant change is that the need for an expert medical opinion is completely removed. It's literally just based on your own feeling and your declaration that you make. And parents can even request to change the registered sex of their children who are under the age of 14. Yeah, so very, very worrying that anyone can change their registered sex simply by making a declaration and paying a very minimal fee. Opens up the door to misuse on many levels, as you can imagine. It also lumps all identities together, including intersex people, in the same umbrella as all different genders that are meant to exist. Another main aspect of the new law, which was previously not included in the Transsexual Act, is that it envisages essentially criminalising the act of misgendering and dead naming, with possible fines of up to €10,000. And here, as we've realised since reading into it, there are two pretty absurd exceptions to the rule. One of them being that the rule does not apply to the person's spouse. They can technically dead name or misgender the person without punishment. And another absurd exception to the rule is that if you say it as part of a compliment, it's not punishable. Yeah. And there's obviously been a lot of criticism on both sides. On the feminist side, of course, the points are the same as you'll hear against self-ID laws anywhere. Endangers women and children, opens up women's spaces to men, makes an absolute mockery of equal opportunities and women's sports. And here too, women's concerns are shut down as being unfounded and hysterical. People say these things don't really happen, men won't really try and gain access to women's spaces, when in fact it is actually already happening in Germany, even without a self-ID law. In Hamburg and Berlin, for example, several male prisoners have already had their requests to be moved to female prisons accepted. And you hear stories all the time about men in women's changing rooms, for example. Yeah, you'd think that the other side would be happy now that the self-ID law that they've been campaigning for so long has finally, seen some movement now that the draft law has been published. But they're not as happy as it seems. They say that it isn't actually that great or better than the Transsexual Act for the transgender community. They say that it isn't validating enough and it's been branded as self-ID light, so to speak. And one of the main reasons that they have branded it as self-ID light is that there are several clauses, I think, which maybe were aimed at making it more relaxed for business owners. One of them being that people who operate businesses that are for women can refuse entry to men, but they don't have to. And we think this really leaves it wide open. It makes it an individual decision of the little man, the little woman, the sauna operators, managers of women's shelters, gyms, and so on. It doesn't actually offer that much legal security. It makes women's freedom and protection an option rather than law. For example, even if you've changed your legal sex, you could technically be refused, if you're a man, for example, from registering for a women's gym or having access to a women's sauna. But you might not, but you might not be refused, but you might be refused. It depends on the business owner, which has consequences that could go either way. Either you refuse a man access and women feel safe and more women sign up to your gym, or it goes the other way, you get branded as transphobic and lose business. That's certainly an area that's not very clear, and something which really needs to be set in law and not left to individual business owners who may have to judge people based on what they look like. So far this law has only been drafted and still has to go quite a long way until it may potentially be enshrined or not. It still has to be voted on by various government departments, and is currently being put out to the public, which means that organisations, associations, and even individuals do have the chance to put a statement in about what they believe would be the impact of self-ID law. And I believe you can still do this till the end of this month. After that, the draft law goes back to the cabinet for the next round of decision making, and maybe after the summer break it will be presented to Parliament for the first time to be read. After that's happened, it still has to be revised again by the cabinet and then presented to the relevant committees, the family and legal committees, and also experts will be called and heard. That's still not the end. It still has to go through another 1 or 2 rounds in Parliament, where it will then be voted on. After that, it still has to be voted on by the Federal Council. I guess you could kind of compare it to something similar to the House of Lords. It has to be voted on by both bodies, and that could sway things potentially. If it does get voted in, then it would likely come into force at the beginning of next year. Yeah, as you can imagine, it's a very worrying situation, and momentum has been growing a lot among feminist groups and women's organisations in Germany. There have been multiple demos and protests this year, last year, a lot of people raising awareness on social media, putting pressure on the German government. Even last year, actually, there was a demo organised by Radfem Berlin right in front of the German government, where Sheila Jeffreys actually attended and held a speech in the rain. Yeah, there's several other women's initiatives too, doing all they can at the moment to raise awareness of the negative impact of self-ID on women's rights and trying to put pressure on those in power.